Hey, welcome to Fireside Technique. This is Jake Meeks of the Tattoo Improvement Network. And a few months ago, several months ago now, we did a technique video that was about building up your line weights, techniques for building up your line weights in tattooing. And we got some great feedback from it. It was a pretty successful episode. But we kept getting the same question over and over afterwards, at least 4 or 5 times. And that question was, hey, now that you've shown me how to technically build up a line, how do I know what lines to build up? How do I decide what lines should be thick and what lines should be thin? And so obviously that's more of a drawing question than a tattoo question. But I thought I would give a couple of examples of how you might use line or how you might decide what lines to build up. There's really no right answer for this. It's about learning how to use line through your own mark making. But there are some guidelines. There are some fundamentals that I can share, and I'm going to share with you a couple of examples that I hope will give you an idea. So let me hop on into Photoshop here. So I'm going to start with a rose, just a very plain Jane boring rose that has the same line weight all the way throughout. One very tattooy way to build up lines that I'll jump into first is just simply to thicken the lines around the exterior of an object, like so. So what we do here is it kind of makes it look like a sticker, right? It looks like it's just kind of popped forward. It just sits, it looks a little heavier, a little more substantial, and it draws your eyes to it a little more because it's bolder and darker and has a little contrast to the white background there. And that's really what we're shooting for, is we want to draw the eye in. That's what we're using line for. That's what we're using building compositions for. That's what we're using value and shape and color. Everything is to lead the viewer's eye where we want it to go. So if I had 9 roses that were all the same size, one way that I could differentiate or lead the viewer's eye through those is through line weight. I can make one of them very bold and heavy, and the one that sat directly beside it I can make a little lighter, and then the one next to that a little lighter than that, and just get those lines progressively thinner as they went up, and your eye would naturally follow the roses the way that I intended for them to be followed. Now, I don't think this is the greatest way to do it, but I will give you here. Let me drop in a second rose, and it'll kind of show you or illustrate my point to that. See how that second row is obviously it's sitting behind because it's being cropped, and it's also smaller, so I used scale a little bit in this as well. But you see how the line really kind of dictates where your eye goes, and then from there it falls back to the second rows. Okay, so that's a very traditional Americana way to handle line weight, just to beef up whatever object you want to be in the foreground or to be the most important, the dominant image, whatever the star is in your composition. Just double that line weight and let everything else fall back behind it. So that's kind of a trick. And it's okay. Let me show you a better way. This is something that I prefer because it takes a little bit of forethought, and it actually looks like something that lives in the real world without even having any value or color or anything. Suddenly this rose becomes a little more substantial. I can see where the light is coming from. I can see that the petals that are coming closer to me are a little bolder and heavier, and the petals that are on the back side of the rose are a little thinner, so I'm getting a little atmosphere in there. I get the sense of a drop shadow. The light's obviously coming from above, and the petals are creating just a little bit of a cast shadow, and the line weights are pretty interesting. They even the thicker lines, they get thicker and thinner. And that's important because, a lot of times in tattooing we get so caught up in the precision of our lines and how clean they are and how smooth every little taper is. And sometimes you're overlooking the bigger picture when you get into that. If a line needs to double in weight over 1/8 of an inch, it needs to get super fat over 1/8 of an inch and then drop out to nearly nothing over the next 1/8 of an inch in order to describe that form. Well, then that's just what it has to do. And the smooth taper and the perfect little edge and all that stuff, it's secondary to describing that form. That's what it all is about. So what's the best way to do this? The best way to do this is to look at roses or whatever you're drawing in real life and pay attention to contrast, pay attention to edge. Learn that what heavier and lighter edges do in your drawings. Experiment with that. experiment with heavy lines in the background and thin lines in the foreground and see what that does for you. It's going to look probably pretty backwards. All your background imagery is going to want to jump forward and your foreground imagery is going to get lost. But until you see that happen, it's all an abstract thought. But once you see how it actually works, once you experiment and see what works, you'll be in a better position to make these decisions. Let's go just a step further with this one. What if we added another edge there? Like so. I mean, I've added a few little veins and stuff in the petals, which I probably shouldn't have. That doesn't do much for it. But take a look at these. Let me zoom in. Take a look at this third edge that we created here on the top side of these petals. So that kind of gives it a three-dimensional look. We can kind of see that the light is coming from that edge. We're describing that edge with thick line on the bottom side, and we're describing it with two thin lines on the top side because light is catching that top plane. Sorry, this is kind of a crude drawing. I did this quickly, and until I zoomed in, I didn't realize how crappy it was. But it's enough to give you an idea. If any of this stuff interests you, or if you feel like you could benefit from learning these kinds of things, I want to invite you to check out a webinar we're going to do. And I'm a terrible promoter, so I don't have a date for it. But we're starting a new program here at Tattoo Improvement called Inside Fireside, and it's going to dive into subjects a little more deeply, and we're going to take on a few small groups of people to kind of work with one-on-one in different aspects of drawing and in tattooing. We're going to start with one that is called How to Develop Your Style, How to Identify Your Style. What we're going to do, it's going to go into a lot of these ideas. We're going to talk about line weight. We're going to talk about value. We're going to talk about composition, different types of perspective. We're going to help you to build a foundation from which to develop your own style. Now, the good news is your style already exists. It's in your natural mark making. If you were to sit around and doodle, you already have a natural style, but we're going to give you a foundation or help you to develop a foundation from which to build your style. I think it'll really help a lot of people that didn't have traditional drawing backgrounds or didn't go to fancy art schools and have gotten into tattooing kind of on their own, or went through maybe subpar mentorships, people from small towns that maybe didn't have a lot of options when it came to apprenticeships and things like that. I feel like we can help a lot. That webinar, like I said, I don't know when it's going to be, but I will put a sign up for it in the notes below this video. So click on that if you have any interest. Sign up for the webinar, and it'll keep you up to date. I would imagine it's going to be sometime in late May or early June. I'll have a very special guest on it that's one of the best draftsmen that I know, and he has a ton of knowledge. So that's it, guys. Thank you so much for supporting what we do. Go to tattooimprovement.com, check out all of our other stuff, and, have a good one.